What's up, everybody? I'm HoopsandHipHop, and welcome back to yet another episode of the Pokeblock Podcast. In last week's episode, we talked about Sword and Shield's really good sales numbers and what it could potentially mean for the future of the series, and in today's episode, we're going to kind of do an extension of that, I guess, because I want to focus more or less on the inevitable or at least potential third version of Sword and Shield, whether that be Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon-esque or Black White 2-esque or even just Emerald and Platinum-esque. I would say it's fairly safe to say that we will get a enhanced version of Sword and Shield at some point, because the only time we ever haven't in any generation would be Generation 6, and Generation 6 is well known for seeming to be kind of given the short end of the stick and having a lot of its plans just scrapped, and so there probably were plans to do it, and they just scrapped it for some reason. So overall, it's pretty safe to say, based on history, that we will be getting some kind of enhanced version, and I think Sword and Shield's enhanced version, whatever it may be, could benefit more as an enhanced version than any other game has in any generation. And so I think it's going to make for an even better game. I think it'll make for a phenomenal game overall, because Sword and Shield are already really good, but they also obviously have some very fixable things that are very identifiable that I think if Game Freak goes into and kind of really works on fixing, that's just going to elevate Sword and Shield to a level that is just astronomical, in my opinion. Because with the other enhanced games, your Emeralds, your Platinums, whatever, obviously they fixed things, but with those games, it was kind of just like a bonding together of the two base versions, because in Emerald, for instance, you have a little bit of storyline with both Team Magma and Aqua, whereas before they're separate, and then Groudon and Kyogre are involved, and then you have the third legendary as the focus. That's kind of the same way with Diamond and Pearl. You have Dialga and Palkia involved a little bit, and then the third legendary is the focus. So while those games improved aspects of their predecessors and tweaked things and whatnot, those games, I believe, they had things that they can improve and things that were done wrong, I guess you could say, but they didn't really have as many things that were as identifiable, I guess, in terms of improvements. And that's not to speak to Sword and Shield being bad, because obviously the games are awesome. It's just with the way Sword and Shield has progressed and developed, it's shown off some things that it definitely can improve. And the very interesting thing about that is that despite Sword and Shield having these very identifiable things that could very legitimately be improved, the game is still phenomenal. The game is still so much fun, despite having things that are so obvious that, yeah, that could be a little bit better. So that's why I personally am so excited for a potential enhanced version. I would say more so than I've ever been for an enhanced version, because of the opportunity they have to kind of just make such a better game with so few tweaks. I'm always excited to play Pokemon games, don't get me wrong, but when it comes to enhanced versions, it's kind of okay, I've seen most of this game before, I've played it already, but I'm still going to play it for the new stuff. I'm going to play it for the Necrozma storyline in Ultra Sun and Moon's case. I'm going to play it for the Distortion world in Platinum's case. You play, as a Pokemon fan, you'll still play those enhanced versions for those new things, because they're always going to add in the new, whether it be new storyline, new modes, that kind of stuff. But by and large, the game is still the same. So you're essentially replaying the game you just played, just with a little bit of DLC or whatever you want to call it, if you will. Just a couple changes. With Ultra Sword and Ultra Shield, whatever we want to call them, I am legitimately way more excited about it if they do it right. The key is definitely that they need to do it right, but I'm way more legitimately hyped about it, because there is like so many ways they could take it. First off, there's the improvements. Now, as far as what there is to improve, like I said, there are some very identifiable things, but it's hard to know what they would specifically go for. First and foremost, you're naturally thinking of the dex. Would they add all the Pokemon? Well, legitimately, I don't think they're going to add all the Pokemon, but I could see them adding a few more. I was thinking about it, and I think that could be a possibility for where those Pokemon within Sword and Shield's data that aren't a part of the dex yet, but are still there in the game. I think that's a potential like landing spot for where they could be coming from, is they could be coming from that next game. So I think, while probably not going to add the whole dex, I think this new enhanced version could add some more Pokemon, which I've said it before. I think the whole aspect of most of the Pokemon being available in the wild, like so you can just catch them as opposed to having to trade for them or evolve them or whatever. I personally think that's a valid trade-off for not having all the Pokemon, because it makes catching the Pokemon so much more fun, especially with the wild area, because they're there for you to discover and just find, and the thrill of finding a Gengar that you've never been able to find in the wild before is amazing. So I think that's a fair trade-off, and so if they add more Pokemon to that, that would just be even better. Obviously can't say how many more they will add, but if they're just adding more to that already super fun experience of just finding hundreds and hundreds of Pokemon literally, I'm down for that. That's absolutely phenomenal. The other things that they could improve, naturally, the second idea that will come to your head are graphics. And graphics, this is another one that I could see minorly improved, but don't expect an overhaul or anything. You have to still realize that this is an enhanced game, so, and it's not like a remake or anything, it's just an enhanced version. So it's still going to have the same engine and everything, but I definitely could see some graphical tweaks. I could see the trees getting a better texture, for instance. I could see render distance being tweaked with to basically allow people to kind of stay visible for longer and not randomly pop in and out as you get basically, I think they could fix it so you don't have people just popping in and out all over the place. It would be a little more natural, a little bit more smooth in that area. Just little tweaks like that, so it's not necessarily, we're working in a brand new engine, this is overhauled, everything is completely fixed, and it now looks like Skyrim. That's not going to happen, but I think those little things in fixing like textures and little graphical just adjustments, that could definitely happen, especially the textures on the trees, because while every single part of game development and graphical development is tough and difficult, because I've sort of dabbled in it, kind of. I did a 3D modeling class in college, and that was easily the hardest class I've ever took. It was the introductory course, and I came out of that course thinking they should really have an introductory course to this introductory course. That's how freaking complicated it was. So I have total respect for anyone who deals with graphics and does that kind of stuff. But when it comes to texturing something, that's kind of like one of the easiest things that you can do in the graphical space, because you kind of just you make the texture and then you map it onto the model. So it's not like it really is something that would be very doable in this situation. And fans have already proven it, because there was a fan mod going around where they actually retextured the trees and they looked a lot better. And that came out it was like a week or so after the game came out that started floating around. So that is something that could be very easily done that would make people so monumentally happy that so many criticisms would just wash away. And it would be because you retextured a tree which is like so insignificant. So I think that is absolutely worth it for them to do. I think it's very doable, especially because since the enhanced versions are based on the base game and the base game is already done, and literally all you got to do is add your couple extra things and that's it. The development on these games is relatively quick and easy, I would imagine. So there's going to be time to make changes like that because you don't have to model the Pokemon anymore. You don't have to build the world. You don't have to focus on all the game modes because that's already done. So now you can use this whole year, if it were to come out next year, to make these improvements. And that gives you tons of time because these things that you're going to make improvements to don't really take a ton of time to do, and they're really the only thing you really got to focus on since you're just building off the base game. So I think that is very possible, very doable. That's something I would personally expect for this just because of that situation. So hopefully when and if they give us this this third version, we will be able to have that. And really quick, before I move on to my next point and kind of actually go back to the conversation, this idea just popped in my head and I kind of want to play around with it. What would the third version for Pokemon Sword and Shield be called? If we take a look, obviously everyone's going to say Pokemon Gun. That's not going to happen. So like on a serious note, what would be the third version? Obviously, with our very first third version, it was yellow. So you had red, blue, and yellow, which are the primary colors, actually. So that makes a lot of sense. But it also coincided with the starters colors, obviously. And then you had crystal, which went along with Suicune. Obviously, it's got a giant crystal on its head, so that makes sense. And then you had emerald, which coincided with Rayquaza. Platinum coincided with what's his face? Giratina. I'm a terrible Pokemon fan. It's sometimes you just forget them. There's almost 900. Give me a break. And then obviously they're coinciding with the names of the previous two versions to kind of like match and make a thing. That's why everyone's suggesting Pokemon Gun, because it's a weapon like a sword. But legitimately speaking, as far as what the name could be, I'm honestly stumped because usually the names coincide with A, the names of the previous two games, and B, a new Pokemon in some way. It's typically the third legendary. Like I said, Platinum coincides with Giratina, Emerald coincides with Rayquaza, Crystal coincides with Suicune, and then you even have the Ultra games, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, that coincide with Necrozma and Ultra Necrozma. So they really do oftentimes coincide with that third legendary, and nearly all the time, the third legendary is the focus of that new game. The problem with that in this generation is that there are only 3 legendaries to be had in the entire Pokédex, and the third legendary, Eternatus, was already used in the story kind of as if it would have been in its own kind of enhanced version game. When I was playing the game for myself and Eternatus got involved in the story, I was super hyped because I loved seeing all 3 legendaries involved, because usually that third legendary kind of just doesn't do anything until its own game. But in this game, it was right in the thick of it, and it actually served as kind of like the main antagonist. Spoilers, by the way. I feel like we're far enough away that if you're voluntarily jumping into Sword and Shield content at this point, you understand the risks. So hopefully that is the case. But yeah, 3 legendaries, only 3. All 3 of them were heavily involved in the story. And Eternatus, specifically as that third legendary, was very much involved as if this was already the enhanced version. That's kind of what I was thinking as I was playing for the first time. I was like, man, this kind of feels like a storyline of a third game, a third base game, and these are just Sword and Shield. These are just the first 2. So like, where could you go from here? You literally don't have another legendary to focus on at all in terms of like picking a new one that you didn't highlight before. And so I have no idea who the the game itself would be centered around. And it's really hard to say what they would do as far as like a new story, because like I said, they've already highlighted each one of them significantly. The only solution I can see to this is that somewhere down the line between now and the end, either the end of the generation or when this enhanced version comes out, they're going to reveal another new Pokemon, like basically like your legendary, where you get your legendary distributions and stuff like that tend to happen. I feel very strongly that is going to happen. The thing is, though, we don't know about it. Usually we kind of like know ahead of time the legendaries that have yet to be revealed. Like last generation, we had Marshadow and Zeraora that weren't actually revealed for a while, but we knew about them because of data mining and stuff like that. This time around, we don't know that to be the case. We haven't seen any like data mined legendary Pokemon or anything like that. So I feel like that would have to be how they did it if they were going to do it. But we don't really have any evidence of that happening, even though it seems like a sure thing. So it's very, very, very interesting. Another route they could technically go is just using Eternatus, but giving it a completely new role in the story and kind of going a different route and having like basically having an alternate reality basically an alternate reality sort of situation, because the Pokemon games have kind of been going more and more in that direction where like every game is its own separate universe or whatever. So they could just do a new game with Eternatus as kind of like the box art legendary, but then it plays more of a central role, kind of like Zacian and Zamazenta did, where like you're learning about Zacian and Zamazenta all throughout the game. That could happen for Eternatus essentially, and maybe you find out like why it came to Earth from the giant meteor, why it's freaking like Dynamaxing and like why it's capable of that and all that stuff. And maybe like, did it come from Ultra Space? Like that is actually a very, very interesting dynamic, because even though we really didn't get any space stuff, if you will, in this generation, obviously every Pokemon game since X and Y in Generation 6 has gone more and more towards the cosmic, the spatial, basically trying to further explain this concept of multiple universes and worlds to explain the Pokemon timeline, that there's a mega timeline, there's a non-mega timeline, games take place in parallel universes, while also sometimes taking place in the same universe, and so that's kind of how Pokemon has been explaining their sequence of events within their games, and it's become more and more apparent, and they've made it more and more apparent as the days have gone, or as the years have gone on, I should say. But with Generation 8, we didn't have any of that. The lone thing that we did have, however, in terms of space stuff, would be Eternatus, because Eternatus came to Earth from a giant meteor, and it is like its body, like it's the origin of Dynamax essentially. It gives off this energy that allows Pokemon to Dynamax. And to me, between that and between it coming from space, I could very well see that being expanded upon in a story, and I could see that I could see them using that as a way to connect to the hierarchy of the Pokemon multiverse, if you will, and kind of further explain what is going on there, because it just seems like they're bound to come to a head with that stuff at this point, and I don't think they've come to that head yet. The reason why I say that is because even though Sun and Moon Gen 7 seems like that's where they ended up, like that was the pinnacle of that storyline, because it was literally focused on ultra space and wormholes and stuff like that, and like how could you get more like focused in on that kind of like storytelling than that. The reason why I think there is still more to go is primarily because of Diamond and Pearl remakes. Like if Generation 7 was the pinnacle, you can't exactly just like stop and start telling a new story with Sword and Shield, and then immediately with like the next big game that you have, go to Sinnoh remakes that are literally all about time and space and the villain trying to build a new universe for himself and destroy the one that we're in. Like, that doesn't make any sense to kind of have this big, huge build-up of just space stuff, once again, for a lack of a better term, but then stop for one game and then pick it back up in Diamond and Pearl remakes, which have been so heavily requested. That doesn't make any sense at all, and so I personally think there's got to be something to bridge the gap between Diamond and Pearl remakes and Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, where we kind of left off with this, with all these elements, if you will. So I think there is going to be something to bridge the gap, and the fact that the third legendary, the Trio Master, I guess you could say, of the 3 legendaries that we have access to right now, the fact that it alone comes from space, and it is the reason why we have the huge feature in Dynamaxing that we have, and that huge feature ergo comes from space because Eternatus comes from space. I honestly think that is all building up to be a part of this larger story, and I think that could very well be what Pokemon, I'm going to say Pokemon Crown. That makes a lot of sense. That'll be my tentative title, Pokemon Crown, for future use in this video. So when I say Pokemon Crown, referring to the third game. So yeah, when Pokemon Crown comes out in 2020, maybe, I don't know. We'll get into the release dates of all these games, because that's another interesting topic in and of itself, hopefully, if we have time. But yeah, when this game comes out next year or whenever it does, I think that could very well be what it does. Bridges the gap between Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon and the inevitable Diamond and Pearl remakes, and kind of keeps the focus on the intergalactic, interdimensional, multiverse storyline that has been established over the past couple years, and then kind of just lays the final groundwork for it to really come to a head and just boil over and climax in the Diamond and Pearl remakes. Because if you were ever going to have a conclusion to this storyline where you officially wrap up all the explanation for what is going on here with the multiverse, you kind of basically finish explaining it and what it's all about. Because I feel like at some point, because the whole reason we're having this is to kind of explain the way the timeline in Pokemon works. So eventually you've got to be done explaining it. There's only so much you can explain. So I feel like if that was ever going to happen, it would have to be about the original games that were about time and space and multiple universes, or the universe in general, with Team Galactic. It's literally in their name. Like, that would have to be the place where you would do it. And because the timing is so perfect to where we're on the heels of it, I just can't see any other way that they would do it otherwise. It makes no sense whatsoever. So I feel very strongly that they are going to bridge the gap with something story-wise in this third game, and that's where the story will be taken, as opposed to where it was in Sword and Shield. So that is my hot take. That is my prediction for Pokemon Crown, quote unquote. So you heard it here first. Boom, that's what's happening. Boom, it's done. But I mean, I just think I think it's got a lot of potential, whatever they end up doing with it. We've covered the improvements, we've covered the story. The other thing, as a final note to that could be very, very interesting, is the potential for more new Pokemon in this third version. Because normally you would never expect that. For the longest time, we were used to and expected to have all of the new Pokemon in a generation revealed in the primary games of that generation, and then maybe we would get an extra form or something throughout the rest of the generation, but no more new Pokemon. Like, that would be all the new Pokemon would be revealed in that base game, and then that would be it. But Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon broke that trend by introducing several new Ultra Beasts in those games that weren't in Sun and Moon. So the new precedent has now been set to introduce new Pokemon mid-generation, and like I said, with the fact that we only have 3 legendaries, which is the lowest we've ever had, and we don't have any mythicals or anything like that, and all of the legendaries have already been used in the story, I would not be surprised at all if these new games are going to be the way that they introduce new legendaries, whether it be 1, whether it be 2, I don't know how many it's going to be, but I could very well see them using that as a way to introduce these new legendaries, because even though Ultra Beasts aren't legendaries, they kind of are legendaries in a way. Like, that's kind of the role they play, even though they're not technically classified as legendaries. So you would essentially be just doing that again. It wouldn't be too different from what you did in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. And even though it's kind of a, I don't know, it's kind of a a cheap shot type of way to get people to buy a new game by having a new legendary specifically be in this version as opposed to Sword and Shield, I do think it offers a lot of interesting possibilities when you drop a new legendary just into the region, because obviously legendaries are where the story is told. And even if it does go this route of focusing on Eternatus more and how it came from space to kind of bridge the gap, as I said, to Diamond and Pearl remakes, other legendaries could come in and help be a part of that. That is very, very possible. And so overall, there's just a lot of interesting storylines that are kind of going into this game, whether it be the opportunity to fix these very fixable mistakes, or how the story is going to work, or how it could once again potentially connect to the overarching story of the Pokemon world and the story of Diamond Pearl remakes and the use of the legendaries. There is a lot going on here that isn't usually going on when it comes to a third Pokemon game, an enhanced version of a Pokemon game. So I think that they have a great opportunity to make not only a fantastic game, but the best enhanced version of any Pokemon game ever. I think they really have the opportunity to do that, because they really haven't had these kind of they haven't had these kind of opportunities, I don't think, with other Pokemon games. So, or at least the other enhanced versions. So I think if they really just dig in, which isn't even that hard to do once again, because the game is essentially already made. I think if they really focus in and focus on making these improvements, I think we're in for a special treat in 2020 or whenever it comes out, because Sword and Shield are already great on their own. And with just a little bit of love and care, a little bit of polish, they could be just absolutely fantastic. But with that being said, that pretty much wraps up our episode for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to leave a like, follow wherever you're listening. Be sure to leave a comment if you're on YouTube as well. That helps out a lot. And be sure to follow me on my personal YouTube channel if you haven't yet already. If you're also on Spotify or iTunes or whatever, you can follow me on those places, because I've got music on there, and it's very much appreciated. But with that being said, I will be back next Friday. Yes, next Friday. I don't know why I'm I don't know why I'm second guessing myself. I think it's because I'm losing my voice. You can probably hear it. I don't know what's going on. I think I'm like dying or something. So I better get off and call it a day. But like I said, next Friday we'll be back. It'll be awesome. Thank you so much for listening. I love you very much. We'll see you again soon. Until then, I'll smell you guys later.